Staff Sergeant Rachel Martinez stepped off the transport bus at Fort Braxton, North Carolina, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination burning in her dark eyes. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling military base, and the sound of boots on concrete echoed through the crisp autumn air. At 28, Rachel had already served 2 tours overseas, but this assignment was different. She was joining the elite 3rd Sniper Battalion, a unit that had never welcomed a woman into their ranks. The guard at the gate looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "You sure you're in the right place, miss?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "The administrative officers are back that way." Rachel straightened her shoulders and handed him her orders. "Staff Sergeant Martinez, reporting for duty with the 3rd Sniper Battalion." The guard's eyebrows shot up as he read the papers. He shook his head slowly, muttering something under his breath about experiments and quotas. Rachel pretended not to hear, but the words stung nonetheless. She had earned her place here through skill and dedication, not because of any special treatment. The battalion headquarters was a weathered brick building that had seen better days. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs of past units, commendations and trophy cases displaying various awards. Rachel noticed immediately that every single face in those photographs was male. She would be breaking more than just tradition, she would be shattering a century of precedent. Captain James Walker, the battalion commander, greeted her with a firm handshake and a weary expression. He was a career soldier in his mid-40s, with graying temples and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Martinez," he said, settling behind his desk, "I'm going to be straight with you. I didn't ask for you to be assigned here. This comes from way above my pay grade. But you're here now, and I expect you to carry your weight just like everyone else. That's all I ask for, sir," Rachel replied. "A fair chance to prove myself." Captain Walker studied her for a long moment. "Fair chance," he repeated. "You should know that some of the men aren't exactly thrilled about this change. They've been working together for years, and they see you as an outsider. More than that, they see you as a risk." Rachel felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice steady. "With respect, sir, I've been in combat situations before. I know how to handle myself under pressure." "I'm sure you do," Walker said. "But sniping isn't just about handling pressure, it's about trust. When you're out there in the field, you need to know that the person watching your back will be there when everything goes wrong. These men have bled together, lost friends together. They don't know you, and frankly, they don't trust you." The captain leaned back in his chair. "Your records are impressive, I'll give you that. Top marks in marksmanship, exemplary service record, commendations for bravery, but records don't tell the whole story. Out here you'll need to prove yourself all over again." As if on cue, the door opened and Sergeant First Class Mike Thompson walked in. He was a mountain of a man, easily 6'4", with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes swept over Rachel with obvious disdain. "This is Thompson," Captain Walker said. "He'll be your squad leader and training supervisor. Thompson, meet Staff Sergeant Martinez." Thompson didn't extend his hand. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked Rachel up and down like she was a piece of defective equipment. "So you're the one causing all the fuss," he said. "Hope you're tougher than you look, because we don't do participation trophies here." Rachel met his gaze steadily. "I don't expect any special treatment, Sergeant," Thompson snorted. "Good, because you won't get any. Training starts at 0500. Don't be late." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Martinez, we've already got a betting pool going on how long you'll last. Current odds are 2 weeks, tops." After Thompson left, Captain Walker shook his head apologetically. "He's a good soldier, but he's old school. Give him time." Rachel spent the rest of the day getting settled in her quarters, a small room in the barracks that felt more like a prison cell than a home. The walls were bare concrete blocks painted an institutional green, and the single window looked out onto the parade ground. She unpacked her few belongings methodically, placing her family photos on the small desk and hanging her uniforms in the narrow closet. That evening, she made her way to the mess hall for dinner. The moment she walked through the doors, conversation stopped. Dozens of eyes turned to stare at her, and she could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her shoulders. She grabbed a tray and moved through the serving line, acutely. Aware of the whispers following her, she found an empty table in the corner and sat down alone. From across the room she could hear fragments of conversation. "What's she even doing here? This is going to get someone killed. Political correctness run amok." A group of soldiers at a nearby table was being particularly vocal. One of them, a corporal with a thick southern accent, was holding court. I'm telling you guys, this is just another one of those social experiments. They want to see if women can hang with the big boys. Well, I got news for them. Some things just ain't meant to be. His buddy, a lanky private with a weak chin, nodded eagerly. My cousin was at ranger school when they let the first women through. Said it was a total joke. Standards got lowered so they could pass. Rachel forced herself to keep eating, even though her appetite had vanished. She had heard it all before, but it never got easier. Every assignment, every new unit, she had to prove herself all over again. She had hoped that her record would speak for itself, but clearly, that wasn't going to be the case here. The corporal's voice carried across the mess hall. Mark my words, first time she gets into a real situation, she's going to freeze up or break down crying. Then it'll be up to us to clean up the mess. Rachel set down her fork and stood up. The entire mess hall fell silent as she walked over to the corporal's table. He looked up at her with a smirk on his face, clearly enjoying the attention. You got something to say to me directly, Corporal? Rachel asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. The corporal's smirk widened. Just making conversation, Sergeant. Nothing personal. Sounded personal to me, Rachel replied. If you have concerns about my qualifications, maybe you should discuss them with Captain Walker. Otherwise, I suggest you save your energy for training tomorrow. You're going to need it. She turned and walked away, leaving the corporal red-faced and sputtering. The rest of the mess hall buzzed with whispered conversations, but Rachel didn't look back. She had drawn her line in the sand. Now she would have to prove she could defend it. Back in her quarters, Rachel sat on her narrow cot and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for, her mentor from her previous unit, Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez. Elena had been one of the first women to serve in a combat role, and she had faced many of the same challenges Rachel was now encountering. The phone rang twice before Elena's familiar voice answered. Rachel, how's the new assignment going? Rachel sighed. About as well as expected. They've got me feeling like I'm starting all over again. That's because you are, Elena said matter-of-factly. Every new unit is a fresh start. The question is, are you going to let them define you, or are you going to define yourself? I want to prove them wrong, Rachel said, but I also need to be smart about it. One mistake and they'll use it to justify why women shouldn't be here. Elena's voice softened. Mia, you can't carry the weight of every woman who comes after you. That's too heavy a burden for anyone. Just focus on being the best soldier you can be. The rest will take care of itself. After they hung up, Rachel lay back on her cot and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to prove herself. She thought about the skeptical looks, the whispered comments, and Thompson's betting pool. 2 weeks they had given her. She was going to prove them all wrong. But, as she drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of her mind wondered if she was setting herself up for failure. The men in this unit had been together for years. They had their own way of doing things, their own codes and traditions. Was she really strong enough to change their minds, or was she just tilting at windmills? Outside her window, the base was settling into its nighttime routine. Guard towers stood sentinel against the darkness, and the distant sound of a helicopter returning from a late training mission echoed across the compound. Fort Braxton never truly slept. It simply shifted into a different rhythm, one that Rachel would need to learn if she was going to survive here. The next morning would mark the beginning of her real test. Physical training, weapons qualification, tactical exercises, all under the watchful and skeptical eyes of men who had already decided she would fail. But Rachel Martinez had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start. Now, as she finally drifted off to sleep, her last conscious thought was of her father's words from years ago, when she had first enlisted against his wishes. If you're going to do this, Mia, then be the best damn soldier they've ever seen. Tomorrow she would start proving those words true. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the darkness at 4:30 a.m., but Rachel was already awake. She had been lying in her narrow cot for the past hour, mentally preparing herself for what was to come. This was day one of her real test, and she knew that every move she made would be scrutinized, every mistake magnified. She dressed quickly in her PT uniform and stepped out into the cool morning air. The base was already coming alive with the sounds of early morning training. In the distance, she could hear the rhythmic chanting of a platoon running in formation, their voices echoing off the brick buildings. The physical training area was located behind the main barracks, a sprawling field dotted with obstacle courses, pull-up bars, and various pieces of exercise equipment. Rachel arrived at 4:55, 5 minutes early, but she was still the last one there. The 12 men of her squad were already assembled, stretching and warming up under Thompson's watchful eye. "Nice of you to join us, Martinez," Thompson called out as she approached. "We were starting to wonder if you'd changed your mind." "No, Sergeant," Rachel replied, taking her place at the end of the formation, ready for training. Thompson looked at his watch dramatically. "Well, since you're here, we might as well get started. Today's workout is a little test we like to call Welcome to the Real World. It's designed to separate the wheat from the chaff, if you catch my meaning." The other soldiers exchanged knowing glances and barely suppressed smirks. Rachel kept her face neutral, but her stomach tightened with anticipation. The workout was brutal. It started with a 5-mile run in full gear, followed by 200 push-ups, 300 sit-ups, and 50 pull-ups. Then came the obstacle course, a hellish combination of rope climbs, wall scrambles, and crawling exercises that left everyone covered in mud and sweat. Rachel pushed herself harder than she ever had before. Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed in protest, and sweat poured down her face. But she refused to quit. She stayed with the pack during the run, matching them stride for stride even when they picked up the pace. During the strength exercises, she watched some of the other soldiers struggle, but she completed every repetition with perfect form. The obstacle course was where she really shined. Her smaller size, which the men saw as a disadvantage, actually worked in her favor. She moved through the tight spaces with ease and used her superior agility to navigate the more complex obstacles. By the time they reached the final challenge, a 30-foot rope climb, she was actually ahead of several of her squadmates. Thompson watched her climb with obvious frustration. When she reached the top and rang the bell, he simply grunted and marked something on his clipboard. No praise, no acknowledgement of her performance, just cold indifference. After PT, they moved to the rifle range for weapons qualification. This was Rachel's wheelhouse. She had been an expert marksman. Since her early days in the military, the standard qualification course required soldiers to hit targets at various distances, from 100 to 800 meters. Corporal Danny Rivers, the same soldier who had been talking trash in the mess hall the night before, was up first. He was considered one of the best shots in the squad, and he made sure everyone knew it. He took his time setting up his position, adjusting his scope with exaggerated precision. His first 5 shots were good, all within the target zone, with 3 hitting the bullseye. The squad murmured their approval, and Rivers preened under the attention when he finished his string. His score was 38 out of 40, an excellent result that would have been impressive in any unit. "Beat that, sweetheart," Rivers called out to Rachel as he cleared the firing line. "Hope you brought your reading glasses." Rachel stepped up to the firing line and began setting up her rifle, a standard M for carbine with a basic scope. She didn't make a show of it like Rivers had. Instead, she worked quickly and efficiently, checking her weapon and adjusting her position with practiced ease. She settled into her prone position and looked downrange at the targets. The wind was light but shifting slightly from left to right. She made a mental note and waited for the range safety officer to give the command to fire. "Shooter ready," the RSO called out. "Ready," Rachel replied. "Fire when ready." Rachel's first shot was a bullseye, dead center. The range went quiet. Her second shot was another bullseye, followed by a third, fourth, and fifth. Perfect shot after perfect shot, with mechanical precision. The silence stretched as she continued through the course, hitting targets at increasing distances with almost supernatural accuracy. When she finished, the RSO called out her score, 40 out of 40, perfect score. The squad stared at her, in stunned silence. Even Thompson looked impressed, though he tried to hide it behind his usual scowl. Rivers was red-faced and sputtering, trying to come up with some excuse for why his score had been lower. "Must be beginner's luck," he muttered. "Let's see if that luck holds up," Thompson said. "Martinez, you're up again. Let's see you do it." With a sniper rifle this time, he handed her an M24 sniper rifle, a weapon she had never used before. It was heavier than her M4, with a more powerful scope and different handling characteristics. This was clearly meant to be a test. Give her an unfamiliar weapon and see if she could still perform. Rachel accepted the rifle and spent a few minutes familiarizing herself with it. She checked the scope adjustments, tested the trigger pull, and got a feel for the weapon's balance. The squad watched her every move, waiting for her to make a mistake. The targets for the sniper rifle qualification were at much greater distances, 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. These were challenging shots, even for experienced snipers, and Thompson was clearly expecting her to fail. Rachel settled into position and began her string of fire. The first target, at 600 meters, was straightforward. She adjusted for the wind and squeezed the trigger. Bullseye. The 800-meter target was more challenging. The wind had picked up slightly, and she had to compensate for bullet drop over the longer distance. She took her time, controlled her breathing, and fired. Another bullseye. The crowd around the firing line had grown as word spread about the new soldiers' shooting performance. Soldiers from other units had wandered over to watch, and even some of the officers had come out to see what the commotion was about. The final target was at 1,000 meters, nearly 2/3 of a mile away. At that distance, the target looked like a small dot through the scope. Rachel made her calculations, factoring in wind speed, bullet drop, and even the slight temperature change from earlier in the morning. She took a deep breath, let half of it out, and held. Her finger tightened on the trigger with steady pressure. The rifle cracked, and everyone waited. At that distance, it took nearly 2 seconds for the bullet to reach the target. The spotter called out, "Center mass." The crowd erupted in surprised cheers and applause. Even some of her own squadmates looked impressed, though they tried to hide it. Thompson's face was unreadable as he walked over to examine the target through his binoculars. 40 out of 40, he announced grudgingly. Again, as Rachel cleared the rifle and stepped away from the firing line, she felt a surge of satisfaction. She had proven herself in the most fundamental way possible for a sniper through superior marksmanship. No one could argue with the targets. No one could claim she had been given special treatment. The evidence was right there in black and white, but her moment of triumph was short-lived. As she was packing up her gear, she overheard Rivers talking to another soldier. "So what if she can shoot?" he was saying. "Shooting paper targets is one thing. Combat is something else entirely. Wait until she's under real pressure, with bullets flying over her head. Then we'll see how steady those hands are." His buddy nodded. "Besides, there's more to being a sniper than just pulling a trigger. You need upper body strength to carry all that gear, stamina to stay in position for hours, and the mental toughness to take a life when the time comes. No offense to the lady, but I just don't see it." Rachel pretended not to hear, but the words stung. She had proven she could shoot, but they were right about one thing. There was more to being a sniper than marksmanship. Over the coming weeks, she would need to prove herself in every aspect of the job. That afternoon brought tactical training. The squad practiced small unit movements, learning to work together as a cohesive team. This was where Rachel faced her biggest challenge yet. The men had been working together for years, and they had developed their own rhythm and communication style. Rachel was the outsider, the unknown variable that disrupted their established patterns. During the first exercise, a simulated patrol through hostile territory, Rachel was assigned to work with Private First Class Tony Kowalski, a quiet young man from Michigan who seemed less hostile than some of the others. Their job was to provide overwatch while the rest of the squad advanced through a mock village. The exercise started well enough. Rachel and Kowalski moved into position without incident, setting up in an abandoned building that gave them a clear view of the area below. But when the time came to provide covering fire, everything went wrong. Kowalski was supposed to call out target locations to Rachel, but his communications were garbled and unclear. When she asked for clarification, he became frustrated and started speaking faster, making the problem worse. Meanwhile, the advancing squad was taking simulated fire from multiple directions and needed immediate support. Rachel did her best to engage the targets she could identify, but without clear communication from her spotter, she was working blind. By the time the exercise ended, the squad had taken heavy casualties, and Thompson was furious. "What the hell was that?" he demanded as they gathered for the after-action review. "Kowalski, your communications were garbage. And Martinez, you were supposed to be providing suppressive fire, not picking your nose up there." "Sergeant, I was engaging targets as I could identify them," Rachel replied carefully, "but without clear target designation from my spotter, no excuses." Thompson cut her off. "In a real firefight, people die when the sniper team can't do their job. You think the enemy is going to wait while you figure out your communication problems?" Rachel felt her face burning with embarrassment and frustration. She knew the failure hadn't been entirely her fault, but Thompson was right about one thing. In combat, there were no second chances. She needed to find a way to work with these men, even if they weren't willing to work with her. After the training session ended, Rachel lingered behind to clean her equipment. She was alone in the armory when Captain Walker appeared in the doorway. "Rough day?" he asked. Rachel looked up from the rifle she was cleaning. "I've had better, sir." Walker stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "I heard about your shooting performance this morning. Impressive work. Thank you, sir. I also heard about the tactical exercise this afternoon. Walker pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. You want to tell me what happened? Rachel considered her options. She could blame Kowalski for the poor communication, or she could point out that the men weren't giving her a fair chance to succeed, but either approach would sound like making excuses, and she sensed that Walker was testing her. I made mistakes, sir, she said finally. I need to do better at adapting to new teammates and communication styles. Walker nodded approvingly. That's a mature attitude. The truth is, these men are testing you. They want to see how you handle failure, how you respond to pressure. Your shooting skills are clearly exceptional, but they need to know you can be trusted when things go wrong. I understand, sir, do you? Walker leaned forward. Because I'm not sure you do. These men aren't just being difficult because they don't like women. They're being difficult because they're scared. They're scared that if you can't pull your weight, someone they care about is going to die. Can you understand that? Rachel met his gaze steadily. Yes, sir, I can. Good, because tomorrow is going to be even harder. Thompson is planning a field exercise that will test every aspect of your training. It's going to be the kind of situation where small mistakes can have big consequences. Walker stood up to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Martinez, I think you've got what it takes. But you're going to have to prove it to them, not to me. And they're not going to make it easy for you. That night, Rachel lay in her cot thinking about Walker's words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself or fail spectacularly. She thought about her father, about Elena Rodriguez, about all the women who had broken barriers before her. She was carrying their legacy, and she couldn't let them down. But more than that, she was carrying the future. If she failed here, it might be years before another woman got the chance to join an elite sniper unit. The weight of that responsibility was almost crushing, but it also gave her strength. She would not fail. Whatever Thompson threw at her tomorrow, she would be ready. The field exercise began before dawn. Rachel and her squad were transported by helicopter to a remote training area in the North Carolina wilderness, a landscape of dense forests, rocky outcroppings, and abandoned buildings that perfectly simulated a hostile environment. The mission briefing was simple: locate and eliminate a high-value target, while avoiding enemy patrols and extracting safely. What Thompson didn't tell Rachel was that the exercise had been rigged against her from the start. Sergeant Mike Thompson had spent years building the reputation of his sniper team. They were known throughout Fort Braxton as the best of the best, a tight-knit unit that could accomplish any mission with surgical precision. The thought of that reputation being tarnished by what he saw as a politically motivated social experiment made his blood boil. So he had made some adjustments to the exercise. Nothing that would put anyone in real danger, but enough to ensure that Martinez would fail spectacularly and publicly. It would be a lesson to the higher-ups about the folly of integrating women into combat units. Rachel was paired with Corporal Danny Rivers as her spotter, the same soldier who had been openly hostile toward her since her arrival. Their assignment was to infiltrate the target area, locate the simulated enemy commander, and take him out with a single shot. Meanwhile, the rest of the squad would create diversions and provide security. The insertion went smoothly. Rachel and Rivers were dropped off 2 miles from the target location and began their approach on foot. The terrain was challenging, steep hills covered with thick underbrush that caught at their clothing and equipment. Rachel carried the heavy sniper rifle along with her full combat load, but she matched Rivers' pace without complaint. After 2 hours of careful movement, they reached their planned observation post, a rocky outcropping that provided a clear view of the target building. Rachel began setting up her rifle while Rivers unpacked his spotting scope and communication equipment. That's when the first problem became apparent. Rivers' radio was malfunctioning, producing nothing but static when he tried to contact the rest of the squad. Without communication, they couldn't coordinate their attack or call for extraction when the mission was complete. Must have damaged it during the insertion, Rivers muttered, though Rachel noticed he didn't seem particularly concerned about it. The second problem emerged when Rachel looked through her rifle scope. The target building was nearly 1,200 meters away, well beyond the maximum effective range they had briefed for the mission. Even worse, the wind had picked up significantly, creating difficult shooting conditions. "Are you sure this is the right position?" Rachel asked, her map coordinates. Rivers consulted his own map and nodded. "This is where we're supposed to be. Orders are orders." Rachel felt a growing sense of unease, but she began making her calculations. The shot was at the extreme edge of what was possible. requiring perfect conditions and flawless execution. She would have to factor in wind speed, bullet drop, temperature, and even the slight tremor in her hands from carrying heavy equipment for 2 hours. She was still making her preparations when Rivers suddenly stiffened beside her. "Movement," he whispered. "Enemy patrol, 200 meters to our left." Rachel looked where he was pointing and saw nothing. The forest was still and quiet, with no sign of human activity. "I don't see anything," she whispered back. There, Rivers insisted. "We need to relocate immediately." Against her better judgment, Rachel began packing up her equipment. They moved to a secondary position that Rivers had scouted, but it was significantly worse than their original spot. The angle to the target was more difficult, and they were now shooting uphill into a stiff CROSSWIND dot. As Rachel was setting up her rifle for the second time, Rivers suddenly grabbed her arm. "Patrol's moving this way," he hissed. "We need to abort the mission." "I still don't see anyone," Rachel said, scanning the area through her scope. "Trust me, they're out there. We're compromised." Rachel had a choice to make. She could trust her spotter's assessment and abort the mission, which would be recorded as a failure, or she could trust her own judgment and take the shot, risking the simulated enemy patrol that Rivers claimed to see. She made her decision. Ignoring Rivers' protests, she settled into her firing position and began her final calculations. The shot was nearly impossible under these conditions, but she had to try. If she aborted now, Thompson would use it as evidence that she couldn't handle pressure. She controlled her breathing, found her natural point of aim, and began applying pressure to the trigger. Just as she was about to fire, Rivers jerked on her arm. "Enemy sniper," he shouted. "We're taking fire." The sudden movement threw off Rachel's aim, and her shot went wide by several feet. Before she could chamber another round, the exercise was called off. Red smoke began billowing from various points around the training area, indicating that their position had been destroyed by enemy fire. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio. "Exercise terminated. All units returned to the extraction point immediately." The helicopter ride back to base was conducted in tense silence. Rachel stared out the window at the passing landscape, replaying the mission in her mind. Something hadn't felt right about the whole situation, but she couldn't put her finger on what it was. Back at Fort Braxton, the squad gathered in the briefing room for the after-action review. Thompson stood at the front of the room with a satisfied expression on his face, like a prosecutor about to deliver a closing argument. "Well, gentlemen," he began, "I think today's exercise was very educational. We learned some valuable lessons about the importance of teamwork and communication under pressure." He turned to Rachel. "Martinez, would you like to explain to the squad why you failed to eliminate the target?" Rachel kept her voice steady. "The shot was more difficult than briefed, Sergeant. The range was extended, and the wind conditions were challenging. When my spotter reported enemy activity, I attempted to take the shot anyway." "But you attempted to take the shot anyway," Thompson interrupted, "even though your spotter was telling you the position was compromised. Is that correct?" "Yes, Sergeant. But no buts, Martinez. In a real combat situation, your failure to trust your spotter would have gotten both of you killed. Not only did you miss the target, but you exposed your position and compromised the entire mission." Rivers nodded sagely. "I tried to warn her. Sergeant told her we needed to relocate when I spotted that patrol, but she wouldn't listen." Rachel felt a surge of anger but forced herself to remain calm. "Sergeant, I never saw any enemy patrol. The area appeared clear throughout the mission." Thompson's eyes narrowed. "Are you calling Corporal Rivers a liar, Martinez?" The room fell silent. Rachel realized she was walking into a trap, but she couldn't back down now. "I'm simply reporting what I observed, Sergeant." "What you observed?" Thompson repeated. "Tell me, Martinez, how many combat deployments have you been on?" To Sergeant and Corporal Rivers. "For Sergeant, for combat deployments, including 2 in Afghanistan where enemy snipers were a constant threat. But you're telling me that your observations are more reliable than his." Rachel felt the walls closing in around her. Every answer she gave seemed to make things worse. "Sergeant, I'm not questioning Corporal Rivers' experience. You're simply making excuses." Thompson cut her off. "The bottom line is that you failed the mission, endangered your spotter, and showed a dangerous lack of judgment under pressure. In my assessment, you are not ready for operational deployment." The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. She had suspected that the exercise was designed to make her fail, but she hadn't been able to prove it. Now Thompson was using that failure to justify removing her from the unit. "Sergeant," she said carefully, "I request permission to repeat the exercise under standard conditions." Thompson's smile was cold. Permission denied. We don't get do-overs in combat, Martinez. One mistake is all it takes. That evening, Rachel sat alone in her quarters, staring at the letter she had started writing to her parents. How could she explain that she was being forced out of the unit? How could she tell them that all her training and sacrifice had been for nothing? There was a knock at her door. Rachel opened it to find Private First Class Tony Kowalski standing in the hallway, looking nervous and uncomfortable. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Rachel stepped aside to let him enter. Kowalski closed the door behind him and stood awkwardly in the small room, clearly struggling with something. "I heard about what happened today," he said finally. "News travels fast. Look, I'm not supposed to be here, but—" Kowalski took a deep breath. "There wasn't any enemy patrol out there today. I was part of the opposing force, and we were nowhere near your position." Rachel's heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Rivers lied. I don't know why, but he lied about seeing enemy movement. You were right to trust your own judgment. Will you tell Thompson what you just told me?" Kowalski's face went pale. "I can't. Rivers is tight with Thompson, and if I speak up, I'll be the one who gets thrown under the bus. I'm sorry, but I can't risk my career for this." After he left, Rachel sat back down on her cot and stared at the wall. She now had confirmation of what she had suspected. The exercise had been rigged against her. But without Kowalski's testimony, she had no way to prove it. The next morning brought devastating news. Captain Walker called her into his office and handed her a set of transfer orders. "I'm sorry, Martinez," he said, and he genuinely seemed to mean it. "Thompson has recommended that you be reassigned to a different unit. He feels that you're not a good fit for the sniper battalion." Rachel looked down at the papers in her hands. She was being transferred to a logistics unit at Fort Hood, essentially a dead-end assignment that would effectively end her military career. "Sir, I believe I was set up to fail. The exercise yesterday was Martinez," Walker interrupted. Gently, "I know you feel like you weren't given a fair chance, but sometimes in the military, perception is reality. Whether the exercise was fair or not, the fact remains that you failed to complete the mission. Thompson has documented concerns about your judgment and your ability to work as part of a team. So, that's it. I'm just supposed to accept this." Walker leaned back in his chair. "You have the right to file a formal complaint through the Inspector General's office. But I'll be honest with you, it's going to be your word against Thompson's and Rivers. And they have years of credibility built up. Unless you have concrete evidence of wrongdoing, you're not likely to win." Rachel felt her world crashing. Down around her, everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was being taken away from her, and there was nothing she could do about it. "Your transfer takes effect next week," Walker continued. "I suggest you use the time to think about your future in the military. There are other ways to serve your country, Martinez. This doesn't have to be the end of your career." But as Rachel walked out of Walker's office, she knew that it was the end, not just of her career, but of her dreams, her identity, everything that had defined her for the past 10 years. She had been broken by a system that was rigged against her from the